I'm Olivia, 32, and I've been married to my husband William for 3 years. We live in a cozy suburban house that we've worked hard to make our home. Everything seemed fine until a few months ago, when things started to shift in a direction I never saw coming. William's parents, who are in their late 60s, have recently retired. They're good people, but they've always been a little, how do I put this, unpredictable. For as long as I've known them, they've had a tendency to spend money like there's no tomorrow, constantly upgrading their house, buying cars they didn't need, and taking lavish vacations. I remember thinking that they were probably enjoying their golden years to the fullest, but it turns out they had been digging themselves into a financial hole. One night, after dinner, William sat me down and dropped the bombshell. His parents couldn't afford their home anymore, and he wanted them to move in with us for a while. He made it sound like it was a temporary thing, just until they could get back on their feet. I froze when I heard him say it. My first thought was, how long is a while? Because let's be honest, when someone says temporary, it usually ends up being anything but. I didn't want to seem unsupportive, though. I knew William felt responsible for his parents, and I understood the importance of helping family, but the idea of them living under a roof made me uneasy. It's not that I don't like his parents, it's more about boundaries and privacy. Our home was our space, and having them here would change that. I told William the first needed to think about it. I wasn't going to jump into something like this without setting some ground rules. He nodded, clearly relieved that I didn't outright say no. But then I made it clear, if his parents moved in, there had to be boundaries. I wasn't willing to let them disrupt our lives without a clear timeline for when they'd be moving out. We'd also need to have a conversation about privacy. Our marriage couldn't take a backseat to their needs. William seemed to agree, and I thought we were on the same page. But looking back, that was the first red flag. He never mentioned those conditions to his parents. Instead, he acted like I was fully on board, which I wasn't, not yet. In the weeks that followed, William's parents started visiting more often, almost as if they were easing themselves into the idea of living with us. At first, I didn't mind it, but then, little things began to pile up. His mom started making comments about how I kept the house. She'd point out areas I missed when cleaning, or how I organized the kitchen. It was subtle at first, but the digs got sharper. I shrugged it off, figuring she was just being picky, but it started to grate on me. One evening, they were over for dinner, and I overheard them talking in the kitchen while I was clearing the table. They didn't realize I was still nearby. His mom said something like, "I don't know what William sees in her. She's not even good enough for him." Then his dad chimed in, saying they hoped William would wake up and realize he could do better. I stood there, frozen. It felt like a punch in the gut. I didn't know what to do. Confront them? Walk away? I ended up walking back to the table in silence, my mind racing. How long had they felt this way about me? And why hadn't William said anything, if this was how they truly felt? That night, I told William what I had overheard, expecting him to be just as upset as I was. But instead, he shrugged it off. "They're just worried about me," he said. "Don't take it personally." Don't take it personally? How could I not? I was his wife, and his parents were saying terrible things about me. But instead of standing up for me, William brushed it off like it was no big deal. That's when the doubt started creeping in. Was I overreacting? Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe they didn't really mean it that way. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. As time went on, things only got worse. Every time I brought up his parents, William would get defensive, like I was attacking them. I felt like I was losing him, like I was the outsider in my own marriage. I couldn't shake the feeling that his parents had never liked me, and now with the possibility of them moving in, it felt like I was going to lose whatever small bit of control I had left in our home. I started talking to my best friend about it, needing some kind of perspective. She didn't hold back. "You need to confront them before they move in," she said. "Don't let them walk all over you." But the idea of confronting William's parents made me nervous. What if it caused even more tension? What if it made William feel like I was forcing him to choose between me and his parents? Still, my friend had a point. I couldn't keep ignoring the situation. Things came to a head when William gave me an ultimatum. He said that if I didn't agree to let his parents move in, they might lose their home, and it would be my fault. He didn't say it in a mean way, but the pressure was there. He was clearly stressed, and it was starting to take a toll on our marriage. I was stuck. I didn't want to come between William and his parents, but I also didn't want to feel disrespected in my own home. Now I had to make a decision, confront his parents and risk blowing everything up, or let them move in and deal with feeling unwelcome in my own house. Neither option felt right, but I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. Update 1. It didn't take long for things to escalate after that first overheard conversation. William's parents visited again the following weekend, and I caught them in another private chat while I was getting drinks from the kitchen. This time it was worse. They weren't just criticizing how I kept the house, they were talking about me personally, making cruel Williams about my appearance. His mom said something like, "She's really let herself go since the wedding, hasn't she?" And his dad just nodded, muttering about how William deserved someone who took better care of herself. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt like they had no respect for me. And the worst part was that they were doing this under my roof. I stood there, just out of sight, frozen for a minute, trying to process it. After what felt like forever, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to let this slide anymore. The next day, they were over again, and I decided to confront them. Calmly, I asked if there was anything they had an issue with when it came to me. I kept my voice steady, hoping that approaching them directly would force them to be honest. But instead of owning up to what they'd said, they played dumb. They acted shocked, as if the idea that they would ever say something negative about me was absurd. His mom, with this fake, concerned look, told me I was being too sensitive and must have misunderstood them. That was gaslighting if I've ever seen it. I was furious, but I kept my composure. I walked away, unsure of what to do next. I waited until later that night to talk to William about it, hoping he'd finally back me up. I explained everything I'd overheard, how it wasn't just a one-off comment. They had been making digs at me behind my back for weeks. But instead of defending me, William looked irritated. He said I was overreacting, that his parents would never say something like that, and that I was probably just stressed from the whole moving in situation. I couldn't believe it. He wasn't just dismissing my feelings, he was completely ignoring what had actually happened. And worse, he was siding with his parents. It felt like a slap in the face. It was clear then that William wasn't seeing the bigger picture. To him, I was being difficult and selfish for not wanting his parents to move in. He couldn't understand why this situation was tearing me apart. As the days went by, the tension between us grew. We started avoiding real conversations, just going through the motions of daily life. But I couldn't ignore what was happening. I finally suggested we go to couples therapy. I told William that if we didn't find a way to talk about this properly, our marriage wouldn't survive. He didn't seem thrilled about the idea, but after a lot of back and forth, he agreed to give it a try. Meanwhile, his parents weren't backing off. They started making more frequent comments about how great it would be if they lived with us, dropping hints about how they could help out with the house. But I knew what that really meant. They wanted to take over. Every time they brought it up, I could feel my anxiety climbing. I hated the thought of them invading our space, especially after everything I'd overheard. The idea of being stuck with them in the same house, day in and day out, was suffocating. When we finally went to our first therapy session, I tried to explain everything. The comments, the tension, how disrespected I felt in my own home. The therapist was understanding and validated my concerns. But William, he barely engaged. He kept deflecting, saying his parents needed help, and that I was being unsupportive by not wanting them to move in. I could tell he didn't see the problem the way I did. To him, it was all about their financial situation, and he seemed to think I was blowing everything out of proportion. The therapist suggested that if his parents were going to move in, we should have an honest conversation with them about setting clear boundaries. That gave me a little hope. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could make this work if William would agree to put limits on their involvement in our marriage. But when we got home, William shot the idea down. He said that setting boundaries would hurt his parents' feelings and they were just trying to help. I couldn't believe it. He was more worried about upsetting his parents than protecting our relationship. At this point, I was fed up. I talked to my friends again, desperate for advice. They told me what I already knew deep down: I shouldn't have to sacrifice my comfort or sanity for people who didn't respect me. It was my home too, and I had a right to feel safe and supported there. I realized they were right, but it didn't make the situation any easier. The resentment toward William was building. Every day, it felt like he was choosing his parents over me, and I was starting to wonder if our marriage could survive this. I felt like I was fighting a losing battle, trying to get him to see how important this was to me. Finally, I decided I couldn't let it go any longer. I told William straight up, if his parents moved in without clear boundaries, it would destroy our marriage. I gave him an ultimatum. Either he set the boundaries with his parents, or they couldn't move in. I wasn't willing to let them steamroll me any longer. William didn't say anything right away. He just looked at me, like he couldn't believe I'd drawn a line in the sand. But I knew I couldn't back down now. Our marriage was on the line, and it was time for him to decide which side he was on. Update 2. After I gave William the ultimatum, things between us changed immediately. The atmosphere at home became thick with tension, and for the next few days we barely spoke. He was distant, keeping to himself and avoiding me as much as possible. I wasn't sure if he was angry or just processing everything, but the silence felt heavy. Every time I tried to bring up the situation, he brushed me off or changed the subject. It didn't take long for his parents to sense that something was wrong. Suddenly they were calling him all the time, asking if I was being difficult. I didn't need to be in the room to know what they were saying. Every time William picked up the phone, his voice dropped to a low murmur, and he'd walk into the other room, shutting the door behind him. I knew they were asking about the move and trying to get William on their side. One evening, I overheard part of a conversation he was having with them. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the door wasn't completely closed, and I couldn't help it. William was telling them that I was acting crazy about the whole situation, and that he was trying to convince me to let them move in. Hearing those words cut deep. It felt like a complete betrayal. Not only was he not standing up for me, but he was actively siding with them against me. The next day, we had another therapy session, and I brought it up. I explained to the therapist what I had overheard, hoping this would finally make William realize how damaging his behavior was. The therapist looked at him, waiting for a response, but William just sat there, arms crossed, looking defensive. When he finally spoke, he accused me of trying to isolate him from his family. He said that I was making him choose between me and them, and it wasn't fair. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He didn't understand, or maybe he didn't want to understand, that this wasn't about choosing sides. It was about respect and boundaries. But he saw it as a loyalty test, and in his mind, I was failing. Things escalated even more at the next family gathering. We were at his parents' house for a casual dinner, and everything seemed fine at first. But then, while I was in the hallway heading toward the bathroom, I overheard his mom talking to his dad in the next room. She was saying that once they moved in, they'd fix everything and help William see things clearly. I couldn't believe it. They were planning to undermine me, to push their way into our lives even more. That night, after we got home, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I confronted William, telling him that I didn't know if I could stay in this marriage if he didn't start prioritizing me over his parents. I told him that his loyalty to them was driving a wedge between us, and it felt like our marriage was crumbling. William exploded. He accused me of being selfish and not understanding the importance of family. He said I was the one causing all the problems by refusing to help his parents. He stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. I was left standing there, stunned. It was like everything had spiraled out of control, and I didn't know how to stop it. I called my friends, desperate for support. They came over that night, and we sat on the couch, talking everything through. They told me I wasn't being unreasonable, that my feelings were valid, and I deserved a partner who would stand up for me. In the days that followed, things only got worse. William's parents were still calling him regularly, and I could tell they were getting more involved in our problems than ever. I overheard snippets of conversations where they subtly implied that maybe I wasn't the right fit for him if I couldn't accept his family. They were planting seeds of doubt in his mind, and he wasn't doing anything to stop them. I decided I couldn't wait for William to make a decision anymore. I had to take control of the situation for my own sanity. I told him straight up that if his parents moved in, I would leave. I wasn't bluffing. I was done being pushed to the side in my own marriage. If he couldn't set boundaries with his parents, I couldn't stay. William didn't take it well. He accused me of giving up too easily, saying that he was just trying to balance everything, but that I was making it impossible by refusing to compromise. He still refused to have any real conversation about boundaries. It was like we were living in two different realities, one where I was fighting for our marriage, and one where he was desperately trying to keep his parents happy, no matter the cost. By the end of that week, I was seriously questioning whether our marriage could survive this. Every conversation with William felt like walking on eggshells, and the resentment between us was growing by the day. It was like we were drifting further apart, and I didn't know how to bring us back together. I was left with a difficult choice: stay and keep fighting for a marriage that felt like it was falling apart, or walk away and take control of my life before I lost myself completely in this battle with his parents. It felt like I was at a breaking point, and I had no idea what would happen next. Update 3. After I gave William the ultimatum, things went from bad to worse. The tension in the house was unbearable. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was short, clipped conversations that always ended in frustration. William was cold, avoiding me at every turn, and I noticed he spent more and more time on the phone with his parents. It was like he'd chosen them over me without saying it out loud. At first, I tried to let it slide, hoping he'd come around, but the passive-aggressive behavior became harder to ignore. He started making subtle digs, implying that I was being unreasonable. He'd leave things unsaid but linger just enough for me to feel guilty for standing my ground, and I could tell his parents were fueling it. Every time they called, they were probably telling him I was being selfish, uncooperative, or worse. Then, one afternoon, his parents showed up unannounced. Again, they didn't come empty-handed either. They had boxes. Actual boxes filled with their belongings. When I saw them lugging in their stuff, I was livid. I couldn't believe the audacity. They were moving things in just in case they needed to move in sooner than expected. It was like they had decided, without any input from me, that this was happening. I confronted William as soon as they left. I asked him what the hell was going on, why his parents were bringing over their things when we hadn't even agreed on them moving in, but he just brushed it off, saying they were just preparing and that I was making a big deal out of nothing. He looked at me like I was the problem, like I was overreacting. It was infuriating. At our next therapy session, I brought it up again, hoping the therapist would get through to William. The therapist focused on the real issue, William's inability to set boundaries with his parents, but William wasn't having it. He got defensive, claiming I was trying to make him choose between me and his parents. He was completely missing the point. This wasn't about choosing, it was about respect, about protecting our marriage from outside interference. But no matter how many times I said it, he wouldn't listen. A few days later, I overheard something that confirmed my worst fears. William was on the phone with his parents again, and I caught bits of their conversation. They were talking about how once they moved in, they'd fix everything and help William see things clearly. It was obvious what they meant. They thought they could control the situation once they were living with us, and William wasn't stopping them. In fact, he was agreeing with them, going along with the plan. At that moment, I felt completely cornered. My home was being invaded, my marriage was slipping away, and I felt powerless to stop it. I started seriously questioning whether staying in this relationship was even worth it. Was it possible to keep fighting for something that felt so one-sided? I talked to my family about it for the first time. I hadn't wanted to involve them before, but I was at my breaking point. My parents were supportive, telling me that I needed to stand up for myself, but they were also worried. They could see how much this whole situation was taking a toll on me, emotionally and mentally. I wasn't sleeping well, I was constantly anxious, and I felt trapped in a nightmare that just kept getting worse. Then William dropped his own ultimatum on me. One night, after another fight about his parents, he looked me dead in the eye and said that either I agreed to let his parents move in, no conditions, or he'd move them in regardless of what I wanted. I couldn't believe the words coming out of his mouth. After everything, after all the discussions, therapy sessions, and confrontations, he was willing to bulldoze my feelings and go behind my back to make it happen. I was heartbroken, but more than that, I was furious. That night, everything came crashing down. I realized William wasn't willing to compromise. He wasn't even willing to try to see things from my side. He was so wrapped up in pleasing his parents that he'd completely lost sight of our marriage. I broke down, sobbing in the middle of the night, feeling like my world was falling apart. I had fought so hard to save this relationship, but it felt like I was the only one who cared anymore. The next morning, I called my best friend. I needed someone to talk to, someone who wasn't caught up in all this madness. She came over right away, and we spent the day going over everything that had happened. She listened, offered support, and reminded me that I needed to think about my own happiness and mental health. She suggested that maybe it was time for me to take a step back, to get some space and clear my head. I thought about it for the rest of the day, and by evening, I knew what I had to do. I needed to get away from the house, from William, from his parents, and all the chaos they were creating. I packed a bag, enough for a few days, and left a note for William. In the note, I explained that I wouldn't be coming back until he was ready to set firm boundaries with his parents and put our marriage first. When he came home and saw me packing, he looked stunned, but he didn't try to stop me. He didn't say anything at all, actually. It was like he didn't know what to do now that I was finally taking action. I walked out, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. I didn't know what would happen next, but at least I was taking control of my life again. I went to stay with my best friend for a few days, and as I left the house, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Now it was up to William to decide what he wanted, me or his parents. Update 4. I spent a few days at my best friend's house after walking out on William. Those days were a mix of reflection and constant conversations with my friends about whether my marriage was even salvageable. It was hard to accept that we had reached this point. I was torn. On one hand, I wanted to save our relationship. We'd built a life together, and I wasn't ready to just throw it away. But on the other hand, the betrayal I felt was real, and it stung. William had let his parents walk all over me, and every time I had tried to establish boundaries, he chose them over me. What surprised me the most during those days away was the silence from William. I kept checking my phone, expecting some sort of message, a call, anything to show he cared about me leaving. But there was nothing. No calls. No texts. It was like he didn't care that I was gone. That silence hurt more than I expected. I wasn't looking for grand gestures, but I thought he'd at least try to reach out to check on me. But it was as if I didn't matter. My friends were my rock during this time. They reminded me that I had to hold firm on my boundaries. They said that if William truly valued our marriage, he'd come around, and he'd be willing to work with me instead of against me. I listened to them, but deep down I was scared that William might not be willing to fight for us at all. On the third day, I finally got a message from him. It wasn't what I had been hoping for. Instead of asking how I was or if I was okay, he simply asked when I was planning on coming home. The message was cold, like he was only concerned about logistics. There was no sense of urgency, no remorse, no acknowledgement of what had happened. I stared at the screen, feeling the weight of disappointment. It was as if he didn't care about why I left. He just wanted to know when I'd be back to resume our normal routine. That same day, we had a couples therapy session scheduled. I went alone. Sitting in that session, talking to the therapist without William there, made everything feel more real. The therapist encouraged me to think deeply about what I wanted from this relationship and whether I was willing to continue if nothing changed. It wasn't easy to hear, but I needed that wake-up call. If William wasn't willing to change, then I had to ask myself, was I really prepared to live like this forever? Meanwhile, I found out through one of William's relatives that his parents had learned about me leaving. Unsurprisingly, they weren't sympathetic. They apparently told William that my behavior was proof I wasn't committed to the family. I wasn't shocked, but hearing it still hurt. I knew they didn't like me, but it felt like they were actively trying to drive a wedge between us. And worse, it seemed like it was working. William's resentment toward me was growing. He wasn't just angry that I left. He was also starting to believe the things his parents were whispering in his ear. He saw me as manipulative, as someone trying to isolate him from his family. The truth was the exact opposite, but there was no convincing him of that. What really sent me over the edge was when William reached out to my parents. He actually called them, telling them I was overreacting and that they needed to talk sense into me. When I found out, I was furious. It felt like a betrayal on a whole new level. Not only was he not supporting me, but he was trying to drag my family into this mess, hoping they'd take his side. A few days after that, William showed up at my best friend's house unannounced. I wasn't expecting him, and neither was she. He was angry, demanding to talk. He accused me of abandoning our marriage, of walking away when things got tough. It turned into a heated confrontation. I told him straight up that he was the one abandoning our marriage by choosing his parents over me, by refusing to set boundaries and let them control everything. For the first time since this all started, I saw William break down. He admitted that he felt trapped, torn between his loyalty to his parents and his love for me. He looked lost, like he didn't know how to navigate the situation. But even in that moment, even as he poured out his frustrations, he didn't offer a real solution. He didn't say he'd stand up to his parents. He didn't say he was willing to change. I laid it all out for him. If he wanted me to come home, he had to tell his parents they couldn't move in. He needed to be on my side, not theirs. I wasn't going to compromise on this anymore. I couldn't. And our marriage was on the line, and it was up to him to decide what he wanted. William said he needed time to think, but his hesitation told me everything I needed to know. If he couldn't make a decision now, when everything was falling apart, then what hope was there for us? His indecision made it clear that, deep down, he wasn't ready to truly fight for our marriage. I gave him one last chance, but I made it clear that I wouldn't wait forever. If he didn't act soon, I was done. I was ready to move on for good, if that's what it came to. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of resolve. It was no longer about what William would do, it was about what I was willing to accept. And I wasn't willing to sacrifice my self-respect anymore. Update 5. After several days at my best friend's place, I decided it was time to go home. I wasn't sure what I'd be walking into, but I couldn't avoid it forever. When I stepped through the front door, the house felt different, colder, like the warmth that used to fill the space between William and me had completely vanished. We barely spoke, exchanging only the necessary words to get through the day. It was like we were living as strangers, navigating around each other without ever really seeing each other. I knew William hadn't made a decision yet. The whole point of me leaving had been to push him to finally choose between setting boundaries with his parents or letting them take over our lives. But days had passed, and he still hadn't acted. The tension between us was thick, and I could feel it growing every time he picked up the phone to talk to his parents. They called him constantly, always with the same message, make Olivia see reason. They framed my boundaries as unreasonable, implying that I was being selfish by not allowing them to move in. Despite all this, William still wouldn't tell me where he stood. He was torn, and I could see it. Every time the topic came up, he'd change the subject or brush it off, but we both knew we couldn't avoid it forever. We had one last therapy session scheduled, and this time I went in hoping for a real answer. The therapist didn't waste any time. She asked William directly if he was willing to prioritize our marriage over his parents' needs. He sat there, looking torn, his face blank as if the weight of the decision was too much for him. But in the end, he didn't give a clear answer. He couldn't, or wouldn't, say what I needed to hear. That was the moment it really hit me. I had been waiting for William to fight for our marriage, to stand up and show me that I mattered more than his parents' demands. But he hadn't, and with every passing day, it became clearer that he was more concerned about not disappointing them than saving us. 2 days after the therapy session, things came to a head. I was in the living room when I heard the front door open. William's parents were here again, unannounced. And this time, they weren't empty-handed. They had more boxes with them, as if they were assuming that they would be moving in, no questions asked. I couldn't believe it. They were acting like they owned the place, completely ignoring the fact that I had never agreed to this. I was livid. I stormed into the room and confronted them right there. It wasn't just about the boxes, it was everything. I told them, in no uncertain terms, that they had no right to move in without my agreement. I was done being walked over, done being ignored in my own home. I demanded that they take their boxes and leave. William just stood there silent. He didn't defend me. He didn't say a word. It was like he had checked out completely, unable or unwilling to step in and set the boundaries we'd been arguing about for months. His parents looked stunned for a moment, then defensive. They argued back, insisting they were just trying to help and that I was being unreasonable. But I didn't care. I had reached my breaking point. Finally, I turned to William and gave him one last ultimatum. Either he told his parents to leave and canceled the move-in plan for good, or I was walking away from this marriage. This was it. There was no more room for negotiation. He needed to make a choice, right then and there. William hesitated, his eyes darting between me and his parents. He still couldn't make a decision. The silence stretched on, and I realized he wasn't going to stand up for me. He was too afraid to hurt his parents, too stuck in the middle to do what needed to be done. That was all I needed to see. I went upstairs, grabbed my suitcase, and started packing. As I tossed clothes into the bag, my hands were shaking, but I knew this was the right choice. I couldn't live like this anymore, always second to his parents, always waiting for him to choose me. William finally came upstairs as I was zipping up the suitcase. He looked panicked, like he couldn't believe I was actually leaving. He tried to stop me, telling me to wait, that we could figure it out, but his words were weak, hollow. He still wouldn't tell his parents to leave. He kept trying to find a middle ground that didn't exist. I walked past him, suitcase in hand, and left the house. As I stepped outside, a mixture of relief and sadness washed over me. I was heartbroken, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something for myself. I wasn't letting them control me anymore. My friends were there for me immediately. They helped me find a place to stay and reminded me that I deserved better, someone who would put me first, not leave me to fight a battle I couldn't win. I leaned on them, grateful for the support, as I figured out my next steps. Later that night, I got a text from William. It was long, apologetic, and full of promises. He claimed he was ready to set boundaries now, that he was finally seeing things clearly. But I couldn't help feeling unsure. After everything, could I really trust him again? Or was it too late to fix what had already been broken? That's where I am now. I haven't responded to his message yet, and I'm not sure if I will. For the first time, the decision is entirely mine.